Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Wayland. I am the lead autism care manager here at Magellan, for those that do not know me. I am very honored to be able to present this training today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to tune in. Today's presentation will be on autism spectrum disorder. As you know, I like to change this training topic every year to give you something different and to try to present in a different training modality. For the past few years, I've really been pushing to explore and share the shift from autism awareness to autism acceptance. This year, I really want to tune into autistic voices, honoring and empowering them through their shared stories. Today, we will be hearing perspectives from those diagnosed with autism, and I hope to challenge you to look inward to break your own stigmas and stereotypes while learning how we can pay it forward as an ally and support this community. I want to be very clear that there is not a one size fits all approach and perspective to take. Individuals with autism have different preferences, whether being referred to as an autistic or an individual with autism versus identifying as an Aspie or self identifying with Asperger's. So, if you're not sure how someone wants to be referred to or referenced, just ask. We never want to make any assumptions. I will be using this language interchangeably in this training. I also want to be very clear that this transition from awareness to acceptance is still a work in progress. And some people will still say autism awareness or use symbols associated with that movement. That's okay. This shift is going to take time, and the more education we have out there, the better. So, these are going to be the training topics for today's training: autism acceptance versus awareness, challenging stigma and stereotypes, honoring and accepting autistic voices, and how we can get involved and show support. So let's jump right into Agenda 1: acceptance versus awareness and why it matters. So let's break this down further, these two words, acceptance and awareness. So let's look at the first example here. It's just a definition from the dictionary. It really doesn't tell us too much. Awareness is a way to show us autism is out there and that it exists. But when you look at the definition of acceptance, it's actually taking that knowledge of knowing something is out there and then doing something better by welcoming it and embracing it. Now let's look at the second set of examples for awareness versus acceptance. Oftentimes, we see awareness ribbons and symbols being utilized for cancers or some diseases. This creates an idea that there needs to be a cure. So, just to give an example, my sister is currently undergoing treatment for breast cancer. In the breast cancer community, as well as with other cancers, there's ribbons to create awareness about the breast cancer or the cancer itself, provide education for screenings and treatments, and ultimately with the end goal to find a cure. Do you see how cancer has a negative connotation? When you hear someone has cancer, people usually apologize and offer condolences. You wouldn't do this for autism. If I were to use the same example with autism, I would be saying my sister is undergoing treatment for autism. But ultimately, there is no cure for autism. It's not something that needs a cure. It isn't deadly. When we have a different approach through looking at autism acceptance, we're aware that it exists and are welcoming it. Autism is just a different way of thinking. It isn't a deadly disease, and they cannot be compared or considered the same. If it was just a different way of thinking, why wouldn't we want to just provide an environment that supports that way of thinking? I also wanted to highlight that this was a controversial example that really did upset the autism community in the past when Autism Speaks did compare cancer and autism together. As you probably heard from my examples, autism and cancer just are not comparable and cannot be utilized in the same way. The last bullet point that we're going to look at is that awareness can allow for stereotyping and bucketing into different ideas of mainstream media portrayals of what autism is. Acceptance is an autistic, community driven change to allow the community and individuals themselves to gain power over how autism is portrayed and seen, and to create an opportunity for acceptance and what needs to be done and what we can do to promote inclusion. Autism awareness is usually contributed to Autism Speaks, with which a lot of individuals with autism dislike and are not in agreement with. I could spend a whole training on this issue, but we are not going to go into that today. The big takeaway is we cannot have autism acceptance without autistics. So it's good to support agencies that are run by autistic individuals or incorporate their voices. So I usually do default to ASAN regarding Autism Acceptance Month information. They are an organization that is run by autistic people. That's very important. I have included a few links below as well. Please read them during this month at some point. But I do want to read out loud a quote from an author of one of the articles below regarding this topic of autism acceptance versus awareness. I wish to live in a world where acceptance is not just the goal, but the reality. I want to live in a world where someone talking in the deficit model of awareness is regarded as uncomfortably out of touch with how things should be. This is my world too, and I want it to be filled with people who know that I am autistic and fantastic, not that I have autism and that it is tragic. In my ideal world, flapping will just be as acceptable as smiling. Earplugs will be a normal sight. AAC devices will be common and everyone will know how to converse with AAC users. In that world, neurodiversity will just be another way that people are unique, and everyone will agree that diversity is part of what makes this world so beautiful. That is by Cassianne S. from ASAM. I think that's just a very important quote. Over here in the logo I have on the right, you can see just different words, terms, symbols that are associated with each movement. So the autism awareness movement versus the autism acceptance movement. These are some of the biggies here. I just want to share 3 more quotes from individuals with autism. So the first one is autism awareness. Knowing autistic people exist. Autistic acceptance. Accepting autistic people as they are, strengths and weaknesses. Autistic pride. Autistic people feeling safe and confident enough to have pride in their authentic neurodivergent selves. Hashtag World Autism Day. That's by Lyric Holmans of the Neurodivergent Rebel. And I'm hoping by sharing these quotes, it will bring us back to our main theme of honoring and accepting autistic voices. Next, we have a quote by Serena O'Donoghue. Moving from awareness, which is often used in discourses on disease and illness, towards acceptance, which is more positive, will help to destigmatize the condition and enable autistic people to speak about our condition on our terms. And last by Ellie Love. Creating awareness was the first step in our conversation about disability inclusion. However, acceptance enforces awareness and reflects how our society should be celebrate the differences and abilities that neurodivergent people have. I'm hoping by hearing some of these voices, you're clearly able to see the differences between awareness and acceptance and why this language difference and movement truly does matter. So, we're just going to recap, and I hope that you can keep this prompt in your mind as we continue through this training. So let's look at the road ahead as well. We know that awareness has laid the foundation to move towards acceptance, but there is still a lot more work to be done. So let's think what can be done. How can neurotypical individuals get involved to support neurodiversity? So again, keep this in mind as we continue through our training together. We're going to move to phase 2, challenging stigmas and stereotypes and accepting and honoring autistic voices. I want you all to take a few moments and reflect on these questions I have written here. Jot down what comes to your mind and thoughts about this. So we want to challenge stigma and stereotypes. It could be our own, it could be what we see in the media, it could be things that we have heard, but just take a few moments and reflect to yourselves on these prompts. So the first one, how do you define autism? When you hear the word autism, what comes to your mind? How have you seen autism portrayed in the media? What comes to mind when you think of the cause, the cure, and the treatment of autism? Who has autism? What if someone doesn't look or act autistic? Are people with autism either a genius, rude with no empathy, or just nonverbal and non-social? All right, let's move on to a TED Talk. We're going to watch What It's Really Like to Have Autism as presented by Ethan Lissy. Keep those questions that we just read aloud on the last slide in your mind and write down some things that you may pick up on or hear or are contradictory to what you have written down for yourself on that pen and paper.
Autism is something that many people know about. For example, some people think that autistic people are fair-skinned males that speak in monotone and constantly go on and on about the same topic. Some people think that autistic people do not know right from wrong, avoid attention, and usually say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Some people think that autistic people are socially awkward and lack humor and empathy. Now, if you agree with what I just said, I'm sorry to tell you, but you do not have the right impression of autism. How do I know? Because I have autism. I do have my own obsessions with things like electronics and public transit, but that does not define me. Each of us are different and unique in our own way. However, there is not a lot of information out there on what an autistic life actually looks like, so people often resort to stereotypes. And we see these often in the media. Some of the more common stereotypes in the media include being socially awkward, lacking empathy, and even being a super genius. And the lack of knowledge on autism doesn't stop there either. Did you know some people are trying to find a cure for autism? That's because they see it as a negative thing, as a disease. Many people are challenging the idea, and to us, we think autism is not a disease. It's just another way of thinking and looking at the world. Our brains function differently from most people's brains. Think of it like comparing an Xbox and a PlayStation. They're both highly capable consoles with different programming. But if you put your Xbox game in a PlayStation, it won't work because the PlayStation communicates differently. When I look in the mirror, I see someone who thinks differently. Oh, and I also see nice hair. But the question is, am I really diseased if I just think differently? The main problem with living autistic in today's society is that the world just isn't built for us. There's so many ways that we can get overwhelmed. For example, the thing that makes me overwhelmed all the time is loud noises, which means I never crank up my music really loud, and I usually am not a fan of large parties. But other people on the spectrum might get overwhelmed with things like bright lights or strong smells or gooey textures that all have the potential to create anxiety. Think about all of the social gatherings you've been to in the past. Was there loud music playing? Were there really bright lights? Were there lots of different food smells going on at the same time? Were there lots of conversations happening all at once? Those things may not have bothered you guys, but for someone with autism, they can be quite overwhelming. So in those situations, we do something called stimming, which is like a repetitive motion or a noise or some other random fidgeting that may or may not seem normal. Some people will flap their arms or make a noise or spin. Yeah, it's basically our way of zoning out. It can often feel necessary for us to stim. However, it's often frowned upon and we're forced to hide it. When we're forced to hide our autistic traits like this, it's called masking. Some people mask better than others. I mask so well sometimes that people don't even know I'm autistic until I give them the big reveal. But at the end of the day, it gets really stressful, and even something like doing my homework at night becomes very tiring. Some people think that because of our ability to mask, that this is the cure to autism. However, all it really does is makes us ashamed of showing our true selves. Another common stereotype that is often associated with autism is that autistic people lack empathy. And again, this is not true. I actually have lots of empathy. I'm just not really good at showing it. Whenever a friend is trying to tell me some of the struggles that they're going through, I often don't know how to express my reply. And that is why I don't show as much empathy as my non-autistic friends do. Emotional expression, however much or however little, is difficult for me. And that is because I am bursting inside with every single emotion one feels at all times. Though, of course, I cannot express it that way. Otherwise, let's say happiness, for example, would come out as a huge burst of gleeful wheezing, hand flapping, and loud vocal woohoos. Whereas you may just smile. Whether it be receiving an awesome birthday gift or listening to a tragic story on the news, I cannot really express my reply without bursting, so once again, I have to mask it in order to appear normal. My inner feelings are unlimited, but my mind only lets me express extremes or nothing. So I'm not great with my emotions, and I communicate differently. And because of that, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And this diagnosis helps me and my friends and family to know how my mind works. And in the world, approximately 1% of the population is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and this number is growing. However, we are still a big minority, and there are still lots of people that do not see us as equals to other people. This is my family, and in my family, there is one other person who is also autistic. My mother. Yes, adult women can also be autistic. My dad and my brother are both non autistic. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult for us to communicate with each other, however. Sometimes I'll say something like, oh, Toronto's Union Station, right? Thinking that I can help them to remember certain aspects of it. When they get confused, I often have to elaborate myself on that. And we often have to say things in a number of different ways so that everyone understands. However, despite all that, we all love each other and respect each other as equals. In his book, Neurotribes, author Steve Silberman states that autism and other mental conditions should be seen as naturally human, naturally part of a human spectrum, and not as defects. And this is something that I agree to completely. If autism was seen as part of a natural human spectrum, then the world could be designed to work better for autistic people. I am not ashamed of my autism, and I may not think like you or act like you, but I'm still human and I am not diseased. Thank you.
We
Generally, I like to show TED Talks when I'm teaching and training, relevant to our theme and our main agenda today, hearing and honoring autistic voices. I hope you did take away some great insight and knowledge regarding Ethan and his experience, while at the same time debunking or challenging any kind of stigma or stereotype you held about autism, and kind of comparing what you originally wrote down on the set of slides we just did, where you challenged or wrote down things that came to your mind, and you can kind of take away and hear some things that may be incorrect, or a way you can think about it differently or show support as an ally. So I just wanted to read off a few biggies that I picked up on that I heard Ethan speak about. So the first quote, but the question is, am I really diseased if I just think differently? Again, autism is just a way of thinking differently. It's not a disease, it doesn't need a cure. The main problem with living autistic in today's society is that the world just isn't built for us. Think back to the first quote that we read in the beginning of this training, where stimming and AAC devices would be something that we just see day to day and are accepted. Those are all modifications that we should honor and provide support and availability to in day to day life. Some people think, because of our ability to mask, that this is the cure for autism. However, all it really does is make us ashamed of showing our true selves. So, again, hiding stimming or any type of restricted or repetitive pattern of behavior in public, and then end up coming home and stimming for hours to get all of that out. That's not authentically living. And those symptoms or behaviors should be accepted. Whether it be receiving an awesome birthday gift or listening to a tragic story on the news, I cannot really express my reply without bursting. So once again, I have to mask it in order to appear normal. My inner feelings are unlimited, but my mind only lets me express extremes or nothing. That one is huge. And you heard Ethan talk about that too during his TED talk, that it is a huge misconception that individuals with autism lack empathy. That is not the case whatsoever. And this is just an example. And I think it's pretty insightful to promote acceptance of how individuals process feelings, emotions, what they can and cannot express, what is difficult, what is a little easier. So again, all insightful ways to learn more and hear and honor autistic voices. So, again, I hope that Ethan already helped you to debunk some of these stigmas, presumptions or assumptions, and stereotypes to autism. So, these are just some ways that I came up with some answers to some of the questions that I asked you to prompt and think about last time. So, just take a few moments if you want to write down something else, any kind of last minute thoughts. You can kind of think of something that was destigmatized for you, any type of reaction that you had. So I'll just go over some different thoughts I have written here. So autism is a different way of thinking, moving, communicating, socializing, processing senses, and doing day-to-day activities. Autism looks different ways. It's not a one size fits all. Some people may need help, some others may not. It's really important to seek media created and or performed by autistic or neurodiverse individuals. So here are some examples of media that you can utilize that's created by autistic individuals. So as we see it, Hannah Gadsby's Douglas, The Reason I Jump, and Love on the Spectrum. There's not a cause of autism. There's no cure for autism. Again, it's not a one size fits all anything for autism, especially for treatment. There are a bunch of treatment modalities out there. Anyone can be diagnosed with autism at any age. I know in Ethan's video, we heard that his mom was actually diagnosed with autism. Um, Women can mask more just based on societal norms and genetic disposition, causing men to be diagnosed more. So there is a different ratio of diagnoses between men and women. Learn what masking is and how it impacts autistic individuals. We talked about it a little today. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into it in more depth, but make sure you learn about it. What is visible to someone on the outside may be drastically different than what's actually going on inside for them. And the last point here, look outside of symptom buckets and labels. Shift your perspective from the linear spectrum to the pie chart or wheel spectrum. We are going to go over this a little more in detail on the next slide. But before we move on, just really, these are just a handful of ways that, autism can be viewed. There's so much more that we see in our day to day, a lot of miseducation out there or incorrect information. So we really want to get, positive, accurate information out there. And most, of course, a supportive and acceptance focused information. So let's dive into the autism wheel versus the linear spectrum. So up here, you're probably most used to seeing the linear spectrum, with one end being identifying as less autistic, the other end identifying as being more or stereotypical autistic. I just wanted to, open this up. There's a consideration to shift from the autism linear perspective to more of a wheel-shaped perspective. This would help to eliminate the level and or severity buckets that you may hear about, as well as break away from the categorization or classification buckets of the good autism or the bad autism. As you can kind of see in this linear model, how it's designed, you're either one or the other. So again, one side could be seen as being more lower functioning, and the other end could be seen or categorized as higher functioning. This can also play into the stereotype that people that are low functioning have ID. That is not true. That's often a big misconception. So when we look at the wheel, this aims to be a more visual representation of autistic traits that reflect on an individual's experience and their own way to visualize and highlight their strengths within their world rather than comparing it to a quote unquote neurotypical model. So, through the wheel, this is a way to show how different autism is for everyone. It also allows a reflection of the traits to change and develop over time. So just because you have one strength in your 20s doesn't mean you're going to have the same strengths in your 30s. You might, and your wheel may look similar, but there could be some changes to your wheel as well. We evolve and we change over time. We can't just be stuck to this bucket categorization system. So there are different types of models with different types of wheels. They can't include everything or all the autistic traits, but it does still serve to be utilized as a highlight. Just with the main message to get across that there isn't one good or bad type of autism. Autism is just autism and it's individualized for each person. And each person's going to have their own needs and their own strengths. There's still a lot more that needs to come out of these wheels. Again, there isn't like a one size fits all wheel that can be utilized. There is some fluidity within the wheels. I just wanted to include this in the discussion because it is a different way we're conceptualizing and viewing and visualizing autism. As we near the end of this training, I do want to share one more TED Talk by an individual with autism. I want you to hear her description of autism, why she doesn't want to be referred to as having Asperger's syndrome, and her own explanation of her autism wheel. So this is the TED Talk Behind the Mask, Autism for Women and Girls, as presented by Kate Kalla. I also wanted to let you know too, if you're not really sure about what masking is, she is going to go into this in a little more detail. So you will get some additional training topics on this.
Hey guys. As a young woman, I've had some pretty cool opportunities. One that I'm most proud of is having my art displayed at the DMA before I turned 17. When I was in the auditorium with all the other young artists being honored for our achievements, I couldn't think of how proud I was of myself. All I could think about was the velvet upholstery of the chairs touching the back of my arms and legs. For me, the sensation of touching velvet is unbearable. You may be thinking, I don't like certain textures either, but there's more to this story you need to know. I'm Kate Kale, I'm 20 years old, and I'm autistic. When I was a freshman in high school, my family noticed that I was having difficulty connecting with my peers. I had also developed severe anxiety, and it showed up in unexpected ways.
Lindor, made to melt.
I always had autistic traits and struggles, but I just thought I was weird. My parents took me in for an evaluation where we learned I was autistic. We were all shocked because I'm not what people would typically think of as an autistic person. Autism is diagnosed when social expectations for neurotypical behavior begin to outweigh the person's ability to perform those behaviors. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a lifelong developmental disability that can cause deficits in communication, social interaction, emotional awareness, and it can cause sensory issues, among other symptoms. The reason it's lifelong is that autism is not a disease and it can't be cured. It's a neurodivergency, which means that the autistic brain works differently than the neurotypical brain. No one is sure why some people have autism. One of the criteria for diagnosis is that symptoms must be present from birth or early childhood, which means that it's not caused by poor diet, bad parenting, vaccinations, and it's not contagious. Evidence has shown that autism can be passed down genetically, which means it may run in families. I found that a lot of neurotypical people and even some autistic people struggle with the concept of the autism spectrum. This is partially because I think it's poorly named, but also partly because the way that experts and researchers think about autism is changing all the time as they do more research. In the past, autism had 3 categories: mild, moderate, and severe. Later, it was thought of more as a continuum like this, from high functioning to low functioning, with high functioning also being called Asperger's syndrome. You may think that as long as a person experiences the same symptoms, what you call their disorder doesn't matter. Here's why I don't prefer the term Asperger's syndrome. Hans Asperger was a medical doctor and early researcher on autistic kids, who he called autistic psychopaths. He was also a Nazi who believed in eugenics, and he sent many of the kids that he worked with to the Third Reich's child euthanasia and sterilization programs. While not the Nazis' main targets, autistic people were considered a threat to the Third Reich goal of a genetically pure society. When people use the term Asperger's syndrome, they're unknowingly reinforcing the idea that autistic people have no value to society. This is why I prefer my disorder be referred to as autism spectrum disorder or autism instead of Asperger's syndrome. Nowadays, the spectrum is thought of more like this. This shows some of the struggles that autistic people can have and the varying degrees to which each person can struggle with those particular issues. Autism can have many symptoms and may vary widely from person to person. Some symptoms you might think of when you think of autism are struggling to make eye contact, poor communication, sensory issues, and obsessing over special interests. But there are also a lot of other symptoms you might never have thought of before, like heightened emotions, making too much eye contact, or high affective empathy. A lot of these less commonly thought of symptoms are more common in women and girls with autism. Here, you can see a spectrum that I filled out to reflect my experiences. As you can see, I have lots of sensory issues with textures and sounds. I focus a lot on my special interests, and I have high affective empathy, which allows me to easily communicate with others. After the initial shock of my diagnosis, it began to make a lot of sense. I finally realized why I had struggled to pick up on other people's negative emotions, like when they're sad or frustrated. This affected my relationships for the first 15 years of my life. I'm very grateful for my diagnosis because it allowed me to understand and accept myself, and I was very lucky to get it. For every 4 boys diagnosed with autism, only 1 girl is diagnosed. Studies that have followed children since birth show that the natural ratio of males to females with autism is closer to 3-to-1. The discrepancy between this diagnostic rate and the actual rate of autism between males and females is likely due to the way autism has been defined and studied and the tests used to diagnose it. The tests used to diagnose autism are still based on studies done on white autistic boys, which likely leads to lower and misdiagnosis in women. I would like to add that this is not only an issue for women, but also minorities. White children are 19% more likely than Black children and 65% more likely than Hispanic children to receive an autism diagnosis. Males who outwardly display mild symptoms of autism are diagnosed on average 2 years earlier than women who display similar symptoms. This might be because female special interests are generally more socially accepted than male special interests. When non-autistic people think about autism special interests, the thing that usually comes to mind is trains. I've never had any interest in trains. When I was a kid, my special interest was in insects. The people in my life saw this as just a healthy interest in the sciences, and it was never really flagged as an autistic trait. While my special interests were an autistic trait that was largely ignored, my other autistic traits were hidden because I was skilled at masking them. Masking is a behavior by which autistic people try to camouflage and seem like they're not autistic. Hearing this for the first time, neurotypical people might think that autistic people are insecure or manipulative for trying to hide our symptoms. This isn't true. The real reason an autistic person would mask is because of a natural human desire to fit in, connect with others, and achieve social and professional success. Masking behaviors can include forcing eye contact, mimicking others' behaviors, expressions, and gestures, and even memorizing scripts for small talk and common conversations. Some people are more skilled at masking than others. I'm really good at masking, and people tell me that all the time, whether they know it or not. When someone says to me that they never would have known I was autistic if I hadn't told them, or even that I don't seem autistic, what they're really telling me is that I'm good at masking. A lot of people see this as a really positive thing. It's something that allows me to live a normal life. And while it's true that some things can be easier when people can't tell you're autistic, it's impossible for a person with ASD to not be heavily affected by it. Autism is a part of us. It colors the way we think, interact with others, and see the world throughout our life. This isn't something that can be turned off with masking. It simply gets pushed down to a level below that at which other people can see it. This pushing down of our true self takes a lot of work. Think about this. When you're having a conversation with somebody, you're doing a lot of things at once. You have the correct posture, you're the right distance away from them, you're using the right facial expressions, you're modulating your tone, you might be gesturing, you're making the right amount of eye contact. You're not looking them in the eyes, but you're not looking them in the eyes so much that it's creepy. And you're predicting what the other person is gonna say and do next. For neurotypical people, all of these things come naturally. You guys don't even have to think about them. But for me, I have to think about all of those things at once. Over the years, I've learned how to juggle all of these things, but it's a Herculean task, and for some, its complexity makes it impossible. The difficulty of masking can often lead to secondary mental health challenges.
I love you. Get screened.
Depression can stem from working so hard and still not being accepted, while anxiety can come from the stress of having to mask for a good portion of the day, every single day, for a good portion of your life, or risk being discriminated against and ostracized. These secondary mental health challenges are of particular issue for women and girls. Starting in adolescence, 34% of women with autism have depression, and 36% have anxiety. Recent studies have also shown a link between eating disorders and women with autism. While these secondary mental health challenges are a big issue, the biggest problem masking causes for autistic people is late and misdiagnoses. If someone is really good at masking, they may never be diagnosed at all. Men and children are the groups seen to be least skilled at masking, and they're also the groups diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder most often. Case studies show that women are more skilled at masking, and this is likely a huge factor that contributes to their late and misdiagnoses. The earlier a person is diagnosed with autism, the earlier they can receive specialized care and treatment that can help them in almost every aspect of their life. Care for autistic people gets better all the time as more research is done, but unfortunately, it's rare to find a therapist or other people who assist autistic people that recognize the extra challenges that come with being a woman. When you struggle socially as a female, learning to succeed socially as a male just isn't enough. Womanhood is a unique and challenging experience all its own. The rules of female friendship, how to talk about romance, menstruation, and even how to stay safe from sexual predators are all obstacles that autistic women face but do not receive support for. While it's tempting in our society to say that gender is something small, obsolete, or insignificant, the truth is gender does matter. And when it comes to autism, it matters a lot. The way the autistic brain works is the same in both men and women. The difference comes in with the vast disconnect between the lived experiences of men and women. All autistic people are born autistic, but from birth, girls are thrust into a more socially rigorous environment that increases the pressure to mask and the challenges an autistic person faces daily. For any autistic person, but especially women and girls, the part of their autism you can see is not what that person is actually experiencing. It's impossible for someone with a limited outside perspective to label someone else's autism, be that labeled mild, moderate, Asperger's, high functioning, or any other label. You can see me up here right now talking to you and try to label me to differentiate me in your mind from another autistic person you may have met, such as maybe a little boy having a sensory meltdown in the mall. You can try to label me in your mind to differentiate us, but the feelings that we're having on the inside are probably more similar than you would think. I've just learned to mask them after years of pressure and practice. This is partially because what society expects of a grown woman is different than what they expect from a little boy, which is reasonable. But society also expects more of a little girl than a little boy. From a young age, girls are expected to have higher emotional intelligence and care more about their peers' emotions than boys. This is reinforced in almost every aspect of their life, from TV shows and toys to the words and actions of family and teachers. Women are better at masking because society expects more from us, and it doesn't make as many allowances for us. Sometimes, society will make exceptions for the social deficits of autistic men in exchange for the knowledge and perspective they can bring to the table, but it won't do the same thing for autistic women. I want you to walk away from this auditorium knowing that autism is not a disease and it doesn't need to be cured. It's just a different way some brains can work. If you want to help autistic people, you can support organizations like Autistics for Autistics, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network that support autistic self-love and acceptance as opposed to organizations that spread fear about autism. You should also identify yourself as an autistic advocate to people in your life, be understanding, and allow friends and family to unmask with you. This is also a call to action for the psychology community to conduct more research on autism in women, people of color, and other minorities. Most of all, I want you to know that every person with autism is different. I got up here today to share my perspective because I'm not what a lot of people would think of as an autistic person. But that doesn't mean that every woman with autism will have the same or even a similar experience to mine. My autism journey is just one out of thousands that can provide insight into the way autistic people think, interact with our society, and see the world. Thank you.
So Kate shared a lot about her experience, based on her gender, how she views the diagnosis, her own personal experience, and a lot of eye-opening and insightful information. I just wanted to highlight 2 quotes from Kate that really stood out to me. So, first one, neurotypical people might think that autistic people are insecure or manipulative for trying to hide our symptoms. This isn't true. The real reason an autistic person would mask is because of a natural human desire to fit in and connect with others and achieve social and professional success. Again, to talk about masking and the way that our society is set up for people to be social and or acceptable. Social and or professional. Next, think about this. When you're having a conversation with somebody, you are doing a lot of things at once. You have the correct posture. You're the right distance away from them. You're using the right facial expressions. You're modulating your tone. You might be gesturing. You're making the right amount of eye contact. You're not looking them in the eyes, but you're not looking them in the eyes so much that it's creepy and you're predicting what the other person is going to say or do next. For the neurotypical people, all these things come naturally. You guys don't need to think about them, but for me, I have to think about all of those things at once. That is so important. Again, those things all come easy. So another activity I like to sit and try to do is just to take a minute and pay attention to the different sensory input you're getting around you. So I know for me, I'm seeing the reflection of the monitors. I have a slight humming in my headset. I'm feeling a breeze from the ceiling fan in my room. I have a glare coming in from the window with the curtains moving ever so slightly and gently. Those are all stimuli that I'm able to, take the input in and organize it and sort it in my brain. Individuals with autism may have hypo or hyper sensory sensitivities where any kind of input may be very uncomfortable or inconvenient, or maybe harder for them to process that external stimuli coming through within the environment. So, that's another great example of everything that can be going on all at once while you're trying to do something, and what may come more naturally, or other things that really need to be, or other things that may feel unnatural and need more effort and support to be able to deal with. So, next and last, let's talk about how we can get involved and show support. So, already by listening and attending and being involved in this training, you're getting involved. You're educating yourself about autism acceptance. These are just a few ideas or ways you can show your support. Um, I just wrote down here within the encompass of this wheel of autism spectrum disorder, looking at how we can get involved and show support through, the first wave of awareness, moving into acceptance. A lot during these videos and during the quotes, we heard so much emphasis on connection. How can we connect amongst each other? How can we make it easier or more natural to connect? How can we get involved within advocacy? And how can we take action to make sure that these changes are made and being heard? So let's start off an unconditional acceptance of autism. Teach yourself about neurodiversity and educate yourself. Connect with other autistic individuals. Identify yourself as an autism ally. Do not use ableist language. So, when I say ableist, I mean anything that would make someone feel or come off as inferior or less than. So, I know we talked about functioning levels during this training. So, rather than saying someone is low functioning, you can rephrase that by saying someone needs additional supports or someone needs more supports. Another good example of this would be, rather than saying somebody is challenging, say that the environment is challenges this person. Support organizations that are run by autistic individuals and or partnered with autistic individuals. Rather than lighting it up blue, which again is an Autism Speaks initiative, you can light it up red or gold, or light it up with color. And last but not least, and of course, most importantly, acceptance cannot occur without autistics. I'll say it again. Acceptance cannot occur without autistic. Their voices matter. We need to hear them, honor them, empower them, and let them guide the way of this movement and this next phase or, wave of autism acceptance. So to end, I like to show some visuals. So again, we talked about that linear model. The spectrum does not look like this. We are far more. Thank you so much for attending my training today. Again, my name is Emily Wayland. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.